Yesterday, I met Bisi face to face for the first time. And I had been asked a while ago to introduce her. I've heard her voice over the phone on our board meetings, which is conference calls, 8 of us on the phone. Can you imagine that? 8 writers on the phone at one time. Wow. But I met her for the first time, face to face. And as I stood by Bisi and said hello, I felt the light, my light, come back at me. And inside there was this little voice saying, "Hallelujah." It was just this moment. She didn't notice any of this. She was being very humble and appreciative that I was standing next to her, stalking her. But I want to say hallelujah. And after reading her biography and going and listening on YouTube to folks introducing her and her many, many speeches, I got to know her real well. But the place I didn't know was her words as a writer. So I wanted to start from the heart and then move up to the head and all the energy. So I asked Bisi to give me some excerpts from her new book that she's working on. This is always odd. How many days until tomorrow? And it'll be out soon. So I asked for some excerpts, and she humbly gave me some. So I want to start with one of her excerpts from the book. I must find the place that was prepared for me before I was born, before I am sure I am where I must be, and learn to stay there. To know that being happy is okay for self-proclaimed revolutionaries. But it's hard to find that road that leads to a place where I can belong. So I am left to wander and guess my way. There's no map except for an occasional prophetic dream, which my grandmother has taught me to interpret. So I wanted to start in introducing Bisi with her own words, because isn't that the heart and why we're here? So let me get into the details of who she is. She is the founder and executive director of the Imani House, a nonprofit created in 1985 in Liberia, West Africa. Although she was born and raised in Brooklyn in a single-headed household, she, her husband, and 5 children immigrated to Liberia after the tragic death of their daughter, Imani, when she was denied admittance to a hospital in South Carolina. I pause. I have a refrain for all of us when I point to you, the audience, and it is this: Imani means faith. So when I point to you, I want us all to say that. When civil war erupted, the family of 7 remained in Liberia and would advance the aims of the Imani House by joining the international relief efforts. Shipping in supplies they collected in the U.S., opening a clinic and providing training programs for women and ex-combatants. In 1996, the family finally returned to New York, disheartened and almost bankrupt. Imani means faith. Today, the Imani House employs 59 staff in Brooklyn and Liberia. In New York, they provide programs of youth development, adult education, information and referral services, and the Women of Color Writers community, and an annual parent-child obesity prevention walkathon. Pause. They serve over 4,000 people a year. Imani means faith. In Liberia, where healthcare and education present major challenges for the majority, the Imani House operates a full-service maternal and child healthcare clinic and adult literacy programs for over 18,000 people each year. Imani means faith. In July 2014, the clinic was at the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak. Losing 2 of their staff to this deadly disease, they were not deterred. She and her husband stood by the remaining clinic staff and helped create Ebola prevention and education teams, shipped 2 ambulances, much needed safety supplies, and renovated and upgraded the current facilities.
Imani means faith.
In 1997, Bisi took training with the AWA founder, Pat Schneider. This was a turning point in her life as she gained the skills needed to create the Women of Color Writers Workshop community, which was meant to respond to the underrepresentation of women of color in the literary world. She credits Pat and the AWA for saving her, like she needed saving, for mentoring and nurturing her as an individual as she delved into the world of writing and supporting other marginalized writers. I ask you again.
Imani means faith.
I want to leave with another quote from her book, How Many Days Until Tomorrow? It's about cholera. This is Bisi. I called her name and she tried to look at me, but her eyes rolled back into her head and closed. She tried to move her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I lifted her head into the crook of my arm. I beg you, oh Ma, open your mouth. Please, Mama, this is going to make the sickness go away. Open now. Don't you want to see your children then? Open now. Imani means faith.
Imani means faith.
I don't really know where to start after that, but I do want to say for anyone who has ever suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome, we are workaholics. We deny that we are suffering, and we work. Thank God that the work I've done has not been for nothing. At least I did positive work. But I'm not a lunatic, but I get other people to help, and that's what's important. I'm a we person, and I'll talk about that. So thank you so much. I'm like trembling because that person you talked about, I've never stopped to notice her. Okay. So I'll start. Okay. So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
On a higher note. I'm humbled to be standing here in front of you, especially given my dress shoes are sitting at home in Brooklyn, beside my bed, and I'm wearing comfortable sneakers with green shoelaces instead. How about that? Let's see what Pat is. Okay. And I want to say this because before I start reading, I want you to know that when I started writing my book, I didn't know how to be lighter. I didn't know how to be friendly in my book. All I knew was tragedy. And so when I finish this, I want you to tell me if I've gotten a little bit lighter, because I'm much too serious. Okay, I must first thank our Pat Schneider. She is the AWA founder and ordained visionary extraordinaire. Thousands of people are writing their way forward, and we are all here in this space and time because of her wisdom and generosity. Thank you, Pat. I'm also elated to thank Maureen for all of her hard work, as well as the AWA board that she sits with us all the time, and the program planners for the part they played in making this first annual AWA conference successful. I see us not being able to fit in this room next time. I also must thank each of you for being out there in our sometimes broken world, helping yourself and others to use writing as a mighty force that documents our existence now and into the future. So I want to thank you all. I'd like to open with a poem from Pat, book, Another River, New and Selected Poems. Going home the longest way around. We tell stories built from fragments of our lives, maps to guide us to each other. We make collages of the way it might have been, had it been as we remembered, as we think perhaps it was. tallying in our middle age diminishing returns. Last night, the lake was still. All along the shoreline, bright pencil marks of light. And children in the dark canoe, pleading, tell us scary stories. Fingers trailing the water. I said, someone I loved who died told me in a dream to not be lonely. Told me not to ever be afraid. And they were silent, the children, listening to the water lick the sides of the canoe. It's what we love the most can make us most afraid, can make us for the first time understand how we are rocking in a dark boat on the water, taking the long way home. Pat Snyder. You can find this poem and many other of Pat's poems in the book Another River. It's illustrated by a world-renowned artist and available on the AWA table and on Pat's website, simply titled Pat Snyder. Proceeds benefit AWA outreach, and we would all agree that's necessary. Isn't she fabulous? Okay, so before my discussion today is on writing toward healing. So besides all the other wonders that writing produces, historical documentation, joy, laughter, grief, poetry, all genres, it has also been proven as a healing force for the subconscious and conscious mind of each of us. The author of The Great Pain Deception tells us that writing reveals our deepest thought processes, and our thought processes can heal. And studies at Ohio State and Southern Methodist University found that by personally writing or talking about the roots of anger, rage, disappointment, trauma, their study revealed that people who wrote away traumatic events had better overall health. And I can tell you, I am as healthy as a horse, except I have a little vertigo. But they can find nothing wrong with me, and I write every day. Ira Progoff, who was a student of Carl Jung and the father of journaling, showed that writing is purging and that purging is healing. And I remember when I started with AWA, I was told, don't be telling people it's therapy. And the writers would come to me, oh, this is better than my therapist. And I said, I can't say this is therapy, not allowed. But I realized that we actually had a session about writing as therapy. And I know for a fact it has kept me alive, and in one piece. It appears that our world of 2015 is pockmarked with tragedy for the majority. Natural disasters, unnatural disasters, insane wars, earthquakes, tsunamis, Katrinas, murder, and mayhem. Sometimes hope is all that's rational, while we are tossed and turned and pushed forward in these raging waters, while our eyes and fingers search for a tree branch, a life raft, to grab hold of before we wash into the abyss and find ourselves physically or mentally dead. For me personally, writing and AWA has been that tree branch, that raft, that life raft, that has kept me afloat or maybe helped me to help someone else on another day. Like many of you, I'm constantly asking, why am I here? What is my purpose in life, and why is it always so hard? From my age of reason, maybe 7 years old, I've been a we, W-E, person. Always in conflict with the me, M-E, person. That feisty alter ego that says it's all about self. I think my we identity began when I joined a scrappy group of girls in the Brooklyn housing projects where I grew up. Although I was not the leader, we used all of the executive model. Brainstorming, strategizing, documenting, and putting together a reasonable implementation plan. There were about 6 of us who spent about 15 thoughtless minutes creating what felt like a viable plan to beat someone up. The strategy was to insult the victim. Then we would all jump on the poor soul and pummel them to the ground. Good plan? How could 6 girls lose? Well, when we finally found the little boy by himself, oh, I'm so ashamed, we began the assault. One of the girls yelled at him. The others called him names. And I stood by, always being a punk, and waited. Then someone pushed me into him, and he beat the hell and the motivation to ever pick a fight with anyone else out of me. The we, W-E, gang, stood by and they never helped. At the end of my beat-down humiliation, my hair matted with gravel and grass, my face black and blue, all they said was, "You sure can fight." I guess I learned some valuable lessons there in that courtyard. One, that to be a we, I need a better plan, a better strategy, a better group, and a better conscience in order to get others to help. I also learned that if I found myself alone, as has been my experience far too often, that I could still do something. And I appeal to you and know that each of you know that. In 1996, when I reunited with Brooklyn, after our family's evacuation from Liberia, there were few branches that I could grab onto. I'd lost my home, lost my way, and in short order was in jeopardy of losing my mind. We were almost penniless. My husband had to go back to work inside of the war in Liberia to support us. I left my children with my mother in Pennsylvania and went back to New York, where I had created a New York branch of Imani House 4 years earlier, even though I had never expected to lead it. Imani does mean faith, thank you so much. But it was hard to believe that God really cared about my family or me. How could he take away my home, the life I wanted to live, and dump me right back into Brooklyn without a branch to grab a hold of? I wanted nothing more than to go back to Liberia, but there were many who needed help in New York. I saw scores of homeless people sleeping on the streets. I noticed that the rates of mental illness among black women over 40 was out of proportion, that many children lacked the motivation to engage education, that immigrants in the neighborhood where the IHI or Imani House storefront was located could not speak English, and that poor people were now even poorer than when I left the country. Yes, there was work to do in Brooklyn, lots of it. I worked from sunup to exhaustion every day. I recruited and trained a few volunteers and opened a food pantry and an ESOL, English for Second Language program, and a children's computer class. But providence and destiny was not finished with me, nor was God. Law-backed literacy and adult literacy program called me in 1997, I had been in New York 1 year, to tell me that Imani House had been chosen for the best new publication of the year, and that I would receive an award at the upcoming convention. The books we had created in Liberia in the Bassa language in our literacy program during the war were the award-winning books. They were easy to follow, beginning readers and teachers' manuals. And it followed Law-backed literacy's new way to reading, a very simple approach. I had been a volunteer trainer and affiliate member with Law-back, both in the United States and Liberia since 1982. So this was one of my missions. At that that conference, the literacy conference, I met a woman in one of the workshops. She told me about AWA, and she offered me a partial scholarship and an invitation to its upcoming training in Amherst for special populations. She explained that I'd be taught to help underserved people use writing as tools to build literacy and self-esteem. Right up my cup of tea. I met Pat in her home there for the first time. I participated in her amazing training workshop. I ate pizza with one of the original Chicopee women, and I fell in love with these women. I fell in love with Pat, the AWA method. I've since attended several AWA trainings and workshops, many of them as on scholarship. And I am honored to be an AWA trainer and board member at this time. In 1999, having taken the training and apprenticed for 2 years in New York, I created the Women of Color Walk Writers workshop that was mentioned earlier. Writing with women in my workshop for over 16 years, journaling for over 19 years, and mentoring with our Pat Snyder has saved and continues to save my life for a better use. While I cannot say that I'm all patched up and recovered, which will be hard as long as there are personal tragedies and people in need, I can say that writing becomes me now. I've learned to express myself. I have encouraged and supported hundreds of women and children through writing, and I'm still standing here in front of you, able to articulate. Best of all, I am home. Home for me now is wherever I lay my head, and wherever I see a we, W-E, group to help us all along our journeys. Thank you, dear Pat. Thank you, Maureen. And thank you all for taking time out of your own lives to join the we of AWA. Thank you.